program Dragnet, normally seen now, will be preempted this one time in order that WCKT may bring you the following special program.
Fidel Castro says Cuba's revolution is not capitalistic nor communist, but Cuban. In any event, it is emotional. The Song of Revolution is only one of many weapons used to stir the spirit of nationalism in Cuba. It has echoed through Cuba since July 26, 1953, for it was on that date that Fidel Castro led a suicide attack on the Fort Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba, the opening shots in the successful war against Fulgencio Batista. I'm Wayne Ferris. This is Fidel Castro. With or without portfolio, he's Cuba's strong man. He's her weakness. Fidel Castro has ruled 6 months, 26 days. Tonight, we examine Cuba's progress since the fall of Batista on January 1st. In this, we may find the key to her future. Fidel Castro fancies himself as a Cuban Robin Hood. By taking from the rich and giving to the poor, Castro expects to solve Cuba's deteriorating economy. As a result, Cuba's wealthy supporters are disenchanted. The middle class is questioning. Castro's strength is clearly in the masses who have nothing. The campesinos, the tenant farmer, who he has given hope. At best, we can label the Castro government a disorganized popular dictatorship. Is Fidel Castro a communist? Possibly. Certainly he is a left-wing liberal. Castro has no patience with opposition. It's easier to denounce them as traitors and counter-revolutionaries. But Fidel is egotistical. When the sniping gets rough, he's like a little boy who seeks his mother for comfort. In this respect, Fidel Castro has hundreds of thousands of little mothers. Less than 10 days ago, he took his troubles to the people. Fidel Castro resigned as prime minister. He had been hurt by what he termed the treacherous words of Pedro Diaz-Lanz, defected Cuban Air Force chief, and capitalistic, treacherous attitude of President Manuel Urrutia. Both had lashed out at communists in the Cuban government. Castro's resignation caught the people by surprise. All Cuba was calm. WCKT's news team in Havana was told it was probably only a political maneuver, that Fidel would not walk out on the people. By mid-afternoon, the move to retain Castro was underway and well organized. Students rallied at the University of Havana, the traditional hotbed of politics. Castro supporters took to the streets with placards urging Fidel to reconsider. By nightfall, all Cuba was alert for another Castro telethon. Troops lined the streets surrounding Havana's CMQ television station. Castro, his brother Raul, military and civil members of his party broke through the crowd. The Prime Minister had come to explain his resignation. WCKT's news director Gene Strull and newsman Dick Lobo cracked security to sit in on the 4-hour telecast in which Castro destroyed President Urrutia. He complained that Urrutia was living the life of Batista, that he was a near traitor, that Urrutia had been disrespectful to the revolution in demanding to make some of the decisions. By 1 a.m., Urrutia had resigned and fled the palace as angry mobs closed in. It was not Fidel, but the people who had spoken.
As you can see in your television cameras, mayhem and chaos has broken loose here at the CMQ studios in Havana, Cuba, as Castro's 4-hour-long explanation of his resignation has just ended, and it seems that he will take over as the president of Cuba in a very short time. During his 4-hour speech, President Manuel Urrutia resigned and sent a memo down to the moderator of this program telling of his resignation that he would like to move away from Cuba quietly. He would not like to leave the country. He would just like to live with his relatives in a secluded spot. At this moment, we're trying to get Fidel Castro to our microphones.
Okay. Prime Minister, can you tell us why you resigned?
Sir, I was 3 hours speaking in Spanish,
yes,
explaining to the people the reasons. I don't hope I can speak in English now after 3 hours speaking. I feel something tired. My English is not very, very bright, and I think I cannot in English to explain all the reasons, but I have the reasons, in our internal reason, domestic reason. I hope that you explain what I spoke in Spanish to your public opinion. But you can be sure that I resign.
You did resign.
I resign only for helping the revolution to save difficulties. Internal difficulties. I explained clearly in Spanish.
Will you return to the job now that ex-President Urrutia has resigned?
I have not decided.
Will the ex-president be permitted to stay in Cuba?
Of course. For surety.
I see. Why did you split with the president?
I said that I explained in Spanish.
I know. Could you tell me a little in English? Just a little.
Difficult. Every time we're increasing. I prefer to renounce it. I really prefer until, instead of taking any measure that could be taken to present me as an ambitious man. Everybody knows that I resign my charge of Prime Minister.
Without a president and without a Prime Minister, what happens to Cuba now?
This is the Minister Conseil. They are the legally authority of Cuba. There are government. Nothing is going to happen. Everybody's in his place, working.
What is your position? Are you still in the government?
My position is now to go to rest. I'm something tired. To sleep this night.
Thank you.
Let me get you taking.
What will happen to your agrarian reform program?
It's marching. Our agrarian reform program is marching.
Even if you are not Prime Minister?
The earth around the sun, our agrarian reform is marching.
He said so.
News Director Stroll then asked Castro whether there were communists in the Cuban government. At this point, the surging crowd in the CMQ studio knocked out our power supply. Castro, slightly irritated by the question, referred to the communist issue as a ghost that everyone but the Cuban people sees. He said the Cuban people do not want outside interference. They want to live their own lives. Then came word that the man who had written the revolutionary law, Osvaldo Dorticos, had been appointed as successor to President Urrutia. 57-year-old Manuel Urrutia lost favor with Castro after accusing the communists of doing horrible damage to his country and the communist newspaper of serving as a Soviet instrument in the Cold War. The former judge was drafted by Castro to head the revolutionary government. He was known to the Cubans as the Spoon, a tool of the government, unable or unwilling to take command. Urrutia had hardly been sworn in when Castro, as Comandante of the Army, kicked himself upstairs as Prime Minister. He modestly denied presidential ambitions. It wasn't necessary. The Council of Ministers rubber-stamped his program. Urrutia's sudden break with the party line came as a shock. As president, he had signed into law a social code under which treason carries the death penalty. Now the Cubans are demanding his scalp. Cuban politics moves rapidly. Within 4 hours on the night of July 17th, Cuba had a new president, 40-year-old Osvaldo Dorticos. Fidel Castro was reconsidering his resignation, and ex-President Urrutia was demanding protection. Dorticos was sworn in the presence of his family. He called on Fidel Castro to remain at the government helm. The new president and his family give the impression of being just home folks. Like Castro, Dorticos thrives on work. But unlike Castro, his answers to WCKT newsman Dick Lobo's questions were brief and pointed. Asked in what way he would change the Urrutia government, Dorticos had this to say.
The government policy will not change as it was directed by Dr. Fidel Castro and will continue to be so.
We inquired as to the threat of communism in Cuba.
Communism is not a threat to Cuba.
And then there was the question about communists in government.
There are not communists in our government.
Perhaps you wonder what the biggest task of a new president is.
The main task of our government is the development of the Cuban economy based on the agrarian reform.
And what about Fidel Castro's role in the new government?
If Dr. Fidel Castro would assume his former position as prime minister, he would have the political leadership of the government in accordance with the Cuban Constitution.
In this country, Pedro Diaz-Lanz, former Cuban Air Force chief and comrade of Fidel Castro, attacked the ouster of Urrutia as a trick. Diaz-Lanz told a Senate subcommittee in Washington he believed that Castro was merely throwing up a smokescreen to cover up his communist activities. Diaz charged that military officers are being given red indoctrination in Havana. Diaz's successor is Major Juan Almeida, close to Castro but not a flyer. He's an alleged former communist leader in the city of Guantanamo. We asked Almeida why Diaz-Lanz was fired.
Ya deseo de hablar más de este señor, pero voy a decir que fue echado de aquí por el nepotismo que tenía en la aviación cubana. No es justo que un cuerpo que es para la integridad nacional la usufructen 4 o 5 parientes, menospreciando el prestigio, las cualidades revolucionarias de los demás pilotos. Me han traído aquí, sin ser yo piloto, para reestructurar el cuerpo. Lo estoy haciendo asesorándome de valores positivos que tenía la aviación y que habían sido echadas a un lado por el jefe de puesto.
Major Almeida has given his interpretation on the Diaz-Lanz matter in the certainty that this man was not fired from the Air Force. Rather than that, he was only accused of his nepotism, which in the time that the Cuban Revolution is facing could not be tolerated. He was not rather fired from the Air Force, he deserted, and at this time we cannot allow things of such a nature to occur within our national crisis.
The major had a little difficulty deciding whether Diaz was a good soldier.
No fue un buen soldado porque no supo, como era debido, representar a su país. Sí puedo decir que es un buen piloto. Cuando el proceso revolucionario servía de enlace entre nosotros y el exterior, y armas trajo de afuera para nosotros. Eso, en justicia, hay que reconocerlo.
Major Diaz-Lanz was not considered a good soldier because he did not know how to represent his country properly. His merits as a revolutionary are recognized because he was liaison between the movement, revolutionary movement in the foreign, and Cuba by bringing a lot of arms and ammunition to the forces of Dr. Fidel Castro. With all justice, this is very much recognized in the sense that he was also an excellent pilot.
We inquired, too, about a possible attack by the Cuban Air Force on the Dominican Republic.
Bajo ninguna circunstancia, Cuba atacaría a ningún país. La aviación de Cuba está para defender la integridad nacional, no para atacar. Nosotros siempre estaremos aquí a la defensiva.
Under no circumstances would the Cuban Air Force attack any foreign country or friendly country. This Air Force is here to defend the national integrity and the rights of the people.
The Air Force, Diaz replied with tongue-in-cheek.
Batista, Trujillo y el senador Island. Creo que la isla está llena de comunistas.
Within the statements and opinions of Trujillo, Batista, and Senator James E. Eastland of the United States, yes, this island is full of communism.
Yesterday, 20 miles east of Havana, police wounded and captured Rafael Del Pino, a leader in the anti-Castro White Rose organization. Del Pino, who had worked closely with Castro in plotting against Batista, split with the revolutionary leader over communist infiltration. Del Pino has since been operating against Castro out of Miami. Cuban police seized Del Pino as he attempted to fly a group of Cubans to the United States. It has been denied that Raul Castro, Fidel's kid brother, is a communist. Big Brother would perhaps do well to consider Raul's associates. Raul Castro is outspoken, yet he remains in the shadow of his glib-tongued brother, a shadow from which he obviously would like to emerge and grow. Fidel had trouble with Raul in the mountains. Now, as commander of Cuba's armed forces, Raul Castro could be the most dangerous man to the nation's internal security. His troops reportedly are communist indoctrinated. The white star of Cuba is painted red on many military vehicles. Significant, perhaps, of Raul Castro's anti-American feeling was an incident reported by WCKT's news director Gene Strull, who watched Raul reject a cigarette because it was American-made. It was more than a thinking man's gesture, for Raul has boasted that Cuba can get along without the United States. Raul is perhaps happiest when his troops are enforcing land seizures under the Agrarian reform program. There's no doubt that Cuba's peasants live a frugal existence under impossible conditions. Few deny that a more equitable distribution of land is necessary and that the farmers need help. Castro's Agrarian reform program is looked upon as their salvation. Anything over 3,500 acres is claimed by the government for the campesinos, many of whom fear the responsibility thrust upon them. Cattlemen claim they cannot operate in the restricted acreage. Castro says they're counter-revolutionary. The Agrarian Reform Institute says all land seized are paid for with bonds maturing in 20 years. Those challenging the legality of the seizure will probably not be around to redeem them. Castro's desire to give the machete-swinging campesino a farm of his own could backfire in economic collapse. The farmer has been promised he would soon move from a crude thatched hut to a modern ranch-type home with a tractor in the front yard. But Castro doesn't say where the money will come from, who will pay for the gasoline, who will instruct the campesino in the use of farm equipment, nor does the farmer ask whether he will be given the deed to his newfound land. Without the deed, the campesino has merely become a tenant of the state, another cog in the socialistic wheel. Good intentions do not always make a good revolution. Castro, on arrival in Havana, declared war on prostitution. Today, the girls are still working the streets and hotels. For the moment, Castro is closing his eyes to Cuba's moral problems. It's a matter of dollars and cents, and Cuba needs the tourist trade. Castro's reforms included putting a halt to gambling, but the casinos are still operating. Business is poor, tourists are still staying away, and tables are ringed by house shills. Action, however, is brisk at the Havana Capri, which donated a tractor to the Agrarian Reform Program. WCKT cameraman Jay Wien found the wheels spinning. News editor Zeke Siegel mingled with the customers, mostly Americans. The wealthy Cubans who once spent their nights at the casinos now stay away from the prying eyes of Castro's secret police. The police are ever present to assure the government of its share of the play. But while the wealthy Cuban is reluctant to play, Castro's little man has his lottery back. Fidel bowed to the demand of the rank and file to lift the ban. What's more, the payoff is in cash, not government bonds. Castro, however, stands firm on such matters as housing. He's ordered 50% rent cuts, but with the landlord's return arbitrarily reduced, new housing construction virtually came to a halt, and the building trades workers were thrown on the open market. This left few who could even pay the reduced rent. Life under the revolutionary government has changed little. The Cuban goes to his job, if he has one, goes to church on Sunday. But the habaneros agree that laughter has returned to Havana. There's no longer silence when a policeman approaches. No longer do the police demand tribute from the taxi drivers and shopkeepers. They're courteous and helpful to tourists. Fidel is moving ahead with his school program. There are reports that the teaching of English in the schools will be curtailed, but there's no confirmation. Castro is concentrating on rural schools, while in the mountains, his troops volunteered for classroom duty in shacks and hovels called schools. As for the press, it's free, but it rarely finds fault with Fidel. Castro's mouthpiece is Revolution. Its director, Carlos Franchi, doesn't like Americans. WCKT newsmen asked Franchi if Revolution is a communist organ.
La Revolución es un periódico independiente. Es el órgano del 26 de julio y la expresión de su revolución humanista. Una revolución que lucha por la consagración de la libertad, de los derechos individuales